Welcome to Scoop, where you get the scoop on this week's news. My name is Jenna, and this is SmartHER News. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to Scoop, where you get the scoop on this week's news. It is Monday, August 18th, 2025, and we are again witnessing a historic event together with a big question about where this story will lead. So on this day, we're awaiting at the White House a meeting between President Trump and President Zelensky of Ukraine. This is coming after the summit that took place between President Putin and President Trump on Friday. We have a whole group of European leaders that have already arrived at the White House. And it's our understanding that the order of the meeting is going to look a little something like this, although we don't know completely. That President Trump and President Zelensky are going to have their sort of meeting, and then the meeting with the European leaders is going to happen after that. And there's a question about whether or not how these things are going to overlap and who else is going to be present as well. We're going to spend the bulk of our time talking about this. We have a great guest, one of our favorites here at SmartHER News, David Satter, a journalist who spent many decades in Russia, witnessed the fall of the Soviet Union, became the first American journalist expelled from Russia since the end of the Cold War, not too long ago, reads and speaks Russian, still has great sources, and he's going to provide some insight that you're not going to get anywhere else, because what we tend to do on the news during these sort of news cycles is we get as many voices as possible because nobody really knows anything. We don't really know what's going to happen next. So then your time is just filled with the clutter of a lot of different opinion, but not necessarily people that have insight. So I wanted to make sure we had a guest that had actual insight. So that's going to be where we're going to spend the bulk of our time. Just real quick here on a couple other news items that we've been watching and keeping an eye on, just so you know what's going to be happening this week. Remember, Congress is still back in their districts. They're still working at home. So they're not in Washington, D.C. So we're not watching major legislation pass. We're not seeing a lot of lawmakers back in front of cameras in Washington, D.C., because they're all home until basically after Labor Day. In the meantime, we do have federal officers and law enforcement on the streets of Washington, D.C. That's continuing. That was big news last week. So we're continuing to watch what happens in Washington, D.C. And one has to think, President Trump mentioned that. He mentioned European leaders and world leaders coming to the city and being concerned about safety and the appearance of the city. And one has to wonder, did he have some foresight, perhaps, of meetings that could be taking place, and had some concern about just the overall perception? We know he's a TV guy. We know he's big on presentation. In fact, one of the questions that I saw in the various news sources today was whether or not President Zelensky was going to wear a suit, because there was a report that President Trump was bothered by his appearance coming to the White House and whether it was a show of respect. So we're going to be, watching these continuing stories in Washington, D.C. In Jackson Hole, Wyoming, there's a big meeting of economic and business leaders that takes place every year. Watch out for the cowboy hats and maybe a little too much leather when these guys usually wear suits. But you got some really high profile people that are going to be meeting at the end of the week in Wyoming, including the chairman of the Federal Reserve. And usually comments that take place at this meeting matter to the markets and also get a lot of news. So I just want to make sure that's on your radar. Plus, we got some data on the housing market that we're going to get this week that won't necessarily lead the news, but it's really a good snapshot of understanding, well, what's going on with the housing market and how does that tie into the broader economy? So just a couple things there. Let me go ahead and bring back David, and I say back because we were having a little bit of a chat earlier with our insiders, and it's always great to see him. He's coming to us from Indiana, and apparently there's a thunderstorm providing dramatic backdrop to our conversation that we hear on the microphone. And one has to wonder, David, is it symbolic? You're not in Washington, D.C., but is there some sort of poetic connection here to the state of world affairs, David, as you see it, as you're watching what could or could not happen in the White House? What do you think?
Well, who knows? It's pouring rain here in Indiana, and the thunderstorms are not a rarity at this time of year. So I'm hoping that whatever it is, it doesn't portend a disaster for the United States or for Ukraine.
What do you Absolutely. What do you think success looks like? I was thinking about this idea of peace earlier today. And when people say they want peace, whether it's internal peace or peace amongst their family or peace between countries, it can mean a lot of different things. It doesn't necessarily have to mean just the stop of fighting. Peace can seem bigger than that. So, what do you think success looks like here when it comes to any sort of a peace deal or any sort of agreement between Russia and Ukraine?
I think that success is a ceasefire and intensified sanctions against Russia for its aggression. Uh, that would be a success. And that's what they were talking about before this summit took place. Uh, Zelensky, as we know, has agreed to a ceasefire. Trump has not. And he's used all kinds of tricks in order to convince uh, President Trump and others that he wasn't rejecting it outright. But a ceasefire would, if it were effective, if it held, would put an end to the killing. Uh, it would create the conditions for the West to rearm and reinforce uh, Ukraine and to intensify sanctions so that the recovery of the remaining territory could be achieved, hopefully, through peaceful means. None of that's likely to happen, by the way. But that would be a reasonable outcome. And in fact, it's what President Trump was talking about up until this meeting with Putin. Now he's talking about, he says we can't have a ceasefire without a peace treaty. Well, you can not negotiate a peace treaty for the next 5-6 years or however many years you want. A ceasefire goes into effect immediately. But I think that we have to understand that looking at all this, that Putin's goal here was not peace. Putin's goal in going to Alaska, in giving the impression that he might be flexible somehow, is to neutralize the threat of sanctions. That's the only thing he's trying to achieve. They may talk about a possible peace settlement, but his conditions are not conditions that Ukraine can accept, unless it turns out that Zelensky feels the country is so exhausted and so desiring of an end to the fighting that they'll accept anything. And I don't believe we're at that point. I think that this whole masquerade is intended to defuse the move to impose what Russia probably fears the most, which are secondary sanctions. In other words, sanctions applied against the people who buy their oil. That could significantly diminish their ability to wage aggressive war. And Putin had to stop it. The best way
And
to.
that And that was mentioned, wasn't it, David? Just to pause you there, just a few weeks ago by President Trump. That was a recent threat that he put on the table, and he said, "I'm going to give." And just to remind everybody, I'm going to give Russia 50 days, or whatever. He's giving them a timeline, and then we're going to hit these secondary sanctions hard. And then the timeline shifted again, and then we found out that there was a meeting. So do you think the floating of those, that even that threat was enough to get Putin to the table here? And this is something that just kind of came together in these recent days?
Well, Putin's, going to the table doesn't mean anything necessarily. I mean, he went so-called to the table to meet Trump in order to give the impression that he was open to a settlement of the war, and prevent Trump from doing what he needs to do, which is to impose those sanctions. And in fact, if you want to negotiate, you do that after the sanctions are imposed and after they've had a chance to take effect. And the sanctions apply not just to India, but also to China, Turkey, Indonesia, and other big purchasers of Russian oil. And it's not 50%. It can be 500%. The question is, do we want to end this war or not? And Putin has no interest in ending the war under the existing circumstances. He for 10 years before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, or almost 10 years, let's say 9 years, Russian propaganda has worked overtime about the threat that NATO posed to Russian security. This, of course, was just the propaganda preparation of the population for eventual aggressive war. Russia always poses as the victim, as a country that's only defending its rightful interests when it invades other countries. And this propaganda preparation continued right up until the full-scale invasion itself. And now for them to agree to, at that time there was no threat to Russia. There were no foreign troops on Ukrainian soil. Ukraine's armed forces were very modest, and they were not aimed in any. They were organized purely for defense. And but now, if Putin agrees to a peace settlement, he'll have to agree to security guarantees that involve foreign troops on Ukrainian soil, and he will face a Ukrainian army which is not only capable of self-defense, but is capable of regaining lost territories. So under certain circumstances. So it's highly unlikely that he's going to agree to that. And it would probably be a threat to the stability of his regime if he did. So what he's really concerned with is not a peace treaty. He wants to continue the war and break the resistance of Ukraine. But he understands that in order to do that, he has got to neutralize the threat of Western sanctions. Trump, when he deserves credit for at least raising the issue of secondary sanctions and raising the issue of penalizing countries like India that are financing this aggressive war. But he's obviously ready to give it up at a moment's notice, because under those circumstances, you don't agree to a meeting in Alaska or anywhere else with Putin. You wait for those sanctions to have an effect. And he didn't do that. I don't know what's going to happen, but I would suspect that in the aftermath of all this, the sanctions against India will be either muted or lifted.
Let me see if I could dip in here, David. I'm seeing something. I just want to see. I can't tell if this is. It looks like it is video from the meeting that's starting to take place.
A lot of good talks.
Let's just dip in here for a second.
Made very, very substantial progress in many ways. We had a good meeting, as you know, just a short while ago with the president of Russia. And I think there's a possibility that something could come out of it. And today's meeting is very important. We have, I guess, the seven very powerful leaders from Europe. And we're going to be meeting with them right after this meeting. And thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. If I can, first of all, thank you for invitation, and thank you very much for your efforts, personal efforts to stop killings and stop this war. Thank you. And using this opportunity, many thanks to your wife, First Lady of the United States. She sent a letter to Putin about our children, adopted children, and my wife, First Lady of Ukraine. She gave the letter. It's not to you, to your wife.
Oh, I want
Yeah. So we are saying this sensitive topic. Yeah. Yes, please. And thanks to our partners and that you supported this format, that after our meeting we can have leaders who are around us, UK, France, Germany, Italy, Finland, EU, NATO, I mean all partners around Ukraine supporting us. Thanks to them and thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you very much for being here.
President Trump.
Do you think it's fair?
Yes, Peter, go ahead.
Thank you, President Trump. So, President Zelensky, you say in a post on X today, Russia must end this war, which it itself started. President Trump, you say President Zelensky of Ukraine can end the war with Russia almost immediately if he wants to, which is it?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think we're going to have a meeting. I think if everything works out well today, we'll have a trilat. And I think there will be a reasonable chance of ending the war when we do that.
And is this the end of the road for American support for Ukraine? Is today's meeting deal or no deal?
I can never say that. It's never the end of the road. People are being killed and we want to stop that. So I would not say it's the end of the road. No, I think we have a good chance of doing it. It's been almost 4 years now that a lot of people were killed last week. A lot of people last week. I mean, millions of people killed, but a lot of people last week for whatever reason, a big number, a lot of soldiers, on both sides. And I know the president, I know myself, and I believe Vladimir Putin wants to see it ended.
And as you met with Putin on Friday, today you've got President Zelensky here. As you listen to Russia and Ukraine, which side has the better cards?
Well, I don't want to say that. I'm just here to be, look, this isn't my war. This is Joe Biden's war. He's the one that had a lot to do with this happening, and we want to get it ended. And we want it to end good for everybody. We want it to end good. The people of Ukraine have suffered incredibly.
And to that point, President Zelensky, are you prepared to keep sending Ukrainian troops to their deaths for another couple of years, or are you going to agree to redraw the maps?
Thank you for your question. So, first of all, we live under each day attacks. That today have been a lot of attacks and a lot of wounded people, and the child was dead, small one year and a half. So we need to stop this war, to stop Russia, and we need support American and European partners. And we will do our best for this. So, and I think we show that we are strong people, and we supported the idea of the United States, of personally of President Trump, to stop this war, to make a diplomatic way of finishing this war. And we are ready for trilateral, as President said. This is a good signal about trilateral. I think this is very good. Thank you.
Mr. President.
If the peace deal will be achieved, are you going to be willing to send American peacekeepers to Ukraine?
Well, we're going to work with Ukraine. We're going to work with everybody, and we're going to make sure that if there's peace, the peace is going to stay long term. This is very long term. We're not talking about a 2-year peace and then we end up in this mess again. We're going to make sure that everything's good. We'll work with Russia. We're going to work with Ukraine, and we're going to make sure it works. And I think if we can get to peace, it's going to work. I have no doubt about it.
Your team has talked about security guarantees. Could that involve U.S. troops? Would you roll that out in the future?
We'll let you know that maybe later today. We're meeting with 7 great leaders of great countries also, and we'll be talking about that. They'll all be involved, but there'll be a lot of help when it comes to security. There's going to be a lot of help. It's going to be good. They are first line of defense because they're there. They're Europe, but we're going to help them out also. We'll be involved.
Vladimir Putin mentioned that the war will not end without addressing the root causes of this war. Have you had an understanding what are the root causes of this war?
Well, look, the war is going to end. When it ends, I can't tell you, but the war is going to end, and this gentleman wants it to end, and Vladimir Putin wants it to end. I think the whole world is tired of it, and we're going to get it ended. It was, I've done 6 wars. I've ended 6 wars, and I thought this maybe would be the easiest one, and it's not the easiest one. It's a tough one. A lot of reasons for it, and they'll be talking about it for a long time, but they'll be talking about the others. Look, India, Pakistan, we're talking about the big places. When you look at, you just take a look at some of these wars, you go to Africa and take a look at that, Rwanda and the Congo, Republic of the Congo. That's been going on for 31 years. And so we've done a total of 6, and we really have 6, not including the fact that we obliterated, and it turned out to be a total obliteration, the nuclear, and as you said, the future nuclear capability of Iran. And this one, I think we're going to get solved also. I feel confident we're going to get it solved.
Mr. President. Can you tell us about your conversations with European leaders and what they need to see to support an end to the war?
Yeah, well, we're going to be meeting with a great representative group and 7 very powerful, very big countries and great people, all friends of mine and friends of yours. And we're going to have some suggestions made. They want to see peace. They would like to see peace.
President Trump,
In the red.
President Trump, do you think it's fair to for Ukraine and for Russia to achieve a lasting and durable peace if Ukraine cedes its territories that Russia hasn't yet conquered? Do you think it's a fair peace for Ukraine?
We're going to have a lasting peace. Just to answer the first part of your question, we're going to have a lasting peace. I hope it's going to be immediately. I hope it doesn't have to go on. And I think people of the whole world is going to be very happy when that's announced.
You posted on social media, Mr. President, a very touching letter from the First Lady. And the letter was hand-delivered to President Putin. And it calls for an end to the war, essentially, because of the children and the children's future. Why did the First Lady feel that letter was necessary? Was it because she believes that Mr. Putin is the aggressor in the war? Is a similar letter being hand-delivered to President Zelensky?
So the First Lady felt very strongly. She's watched the same thing that you watch and that I watch. I see things that you don't get to see, and it's horrible. But when she's got a great love of children, she has a wonderful son that she loves, probably more than anybody, including me. I hate to say it, but she loves her son. She loves children, and she hates to see something like this happening. And that goes for other wars too. I mean, she sees the heartbreak, the parents, the funerals that you see on television. Always funerals. We want to see something other than funerals. No, she felt it was a beautiful letter. It was very well received by him. And she did ask me to say, she would love to see this end. She would love to see it end. And she says it very openly, very proudly, and with great sorrow because so many people have been killed.
President, last week,
Brian, go ahead, Brian.
Yes, sir. I've got a question for each of you.
Yes.
First of all, Mr. President Zelensky, you look fabulous in that suit.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, you look good.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, looks good on
I
you.
said the one that attacked you last time.
Yeah.
See, now he's
I remember that.
Yeah, I apologize to you. You look wonderful. No, my first question for you, President Zelensky.
In the same suit. You see, I changed, you are not.
Maybe yours is much better. Real quickly, upon peace, God willing, we get peace. Are you open to holding an election in your country?
Yes, of course. We are open for election, yes. We have to do safety circumstances and a little bit, we need to work in the parliament because during the war you can't have elections, but we can do security. We need, maybe, how to say, we need a truth, yes, everywhere, in the battlefield, in the sky, and the sea, yeah, to make possible for people to do democratic, open, legal elections.
So you say during the war you can't have elections. So let me just say 3.5 years from now. So you mean if we happen to be in a war with somebody, no more elections? Oh, that's good. I wonder what the fake
You like
news
this
is.
idea?
Yeah.
No.
Speaking of news, I got a question for you. This sounds insane for me even to ask this, but do you think the American media really doesn't even want a peace deal because they've been so critical of you every step of the way as you lead the charge for peace?
It's an amazing phenomenon. I said that if in the settlement you got Moscow, St. Petersburg, and thousands of miles around them, they would say, I made a bad deal. The level of hatred and animosity is incredible. Not with all. I mean, we have great people up here. We also have terrible people up there that I think are told what to say. But, you know, in solving all of these wars, they don't even write about it. You know, I saw major wars. I saw wars that have been going on for 31, 35, and 37, and a couple of quicker ones. One that was going to go into a full-blown deal very quickly. You know what the one I'm talking about. It was a big one. But they don't even write about that. No matter what I do, no matter what, and you know, this is not anything to do with you. It's probably to your advantage in a certain way. But no matter what I do, no matter what deal I make, from my standpoint, you'll come out good. Maybe President Putin will come out good. But they'll say, Trump was absolutely horrible. It's just that, and I've lived with that for a long time. I've lived with it since just before the first election. I used to get great publicity. Now I get the worst publicity anyone's ever gotten in office, but I won in a landslide, so the people understand. They're the only ones that count, ultimately. But I've also had great reporters. I've had journalists that are very good. But it's very sad when you do the right thing. As an example, they said, because of the fact that Vladimir Putin came to American soil, this was a tremendous defeat for Donald Trump. No, it was really wonderful that he did it. It was a hard thing for him to do, to be honest with you. It was the opposite of what they said, but they said it. Now, if he didn't come, they'd say that was also bad for Trump. You know, there's no way. And there's just a great dishonesty of the press. And I think that's why it's lost its credibility. You know, its credibility is at an all-time low. We have a thing going on right now in D.C. We went from the most unsafe.
Okay, I'm going to bring him down just for a second to see. I thought I heard in the background someone saying last question, and we'll see. I want you to hear as much as this is possible, but I want to make sure that we stay on the news. And now we're getting into a little conversation about the press too. And so let me just bullet point a few things as we wait to see if he goes on to any other questions. And Stephanie, who's listening along with me, if you could just flag me if he does. It seems like they were moving towards sort of wrapping things up and moving behind closed doors. But remember last time, it seemed to be that was going to be the case. And it was right at the end that you had this back and forth between President Zelensky and Vice President Vance. And that became a huge news item and a break in relations between the United States and Ukraine, at least temporarily. So I want to keep an eye on this. There were two big things that the president has said so far that I think are really important. One is that he believes that President Putin wants to see the war to end, that he wants to see an end to the war. I want to ask David Satter about that in just a moment, because David has that experience, obviously, watching the way that President Putin leads. But the other important thing is there was a question about involvement of U.S. troops and whether or not we would be part of this peacekeeping force. This is just related to some reports. We haven't gotten there yet in this report that we're doing right now. There's been some reports that part of some sort of deal would be that the European countries as well as the United States would provide some security guarantees to Ukraine, meaning that if something were to happen, we would come to Ukraine's aid, even if they're not a member of NATO, which is the largest military alliance in the world. Apparently, that has been a red line for Russia about Ukraine joining NATO. And I know David and I have talked a lot about that in the past. And so that's been a point of contention. And obviously, there's been a lot of debate about that in the West, as well as whether or not Ukraine actually has the same values as NATO and whether or not it should also be part of the alliance. That's almost a kind of a separate conversation. But the fact that the president didn't close the door completely to U.S. troops being on the ground in some capacity is newsworthy. We don't know what that means. And the president tends to be vague in the way that he speaks. You know, he leaves himself a lot of room. David, what do you think of what he had to say so far? We'll keep an eye on what, if any other news comes out, and where he's going back and forth with the same journalists that he's already answered. So what stands out most to you about what he said so far?
Well, he's very self-involved. He describes this war as the fault of Joe Biden, and of course he was president also during from 2016 to 2020 when there was war going on in eastern Ukraine. That's one thing. He said that he thinks that Putin wants to stop the war. Yes, he would like to stop the war with the destruction of Ukraine, but he has no interest in stopping the war. He wouldn't have started it. As for American troops in Ukraine, I find that hard to believe if at the same time he's saying that Ukraine will not be a member of NATO. There's a contradiction here between supposed Russian agreement to protections for Ukraine and Russian refusal to accept Ukraine as a member of NATO, since those protections are the core of NATO membership. It suggests to me really that what he's talking about is some type of a formula which the Russians can ignore, and they have a long history of doing that. If it were, I mean, what the whole thing comes down to is if any agreement has security guarantees that have real teeth and are capable of deterring Russia, Russia will not agree to it. And any agreement that doesn't have those guarantees and those provisions will not be worth the paper it's written on. So I don't see a path to peace here. I see a path to neutralizing the United States, making the United States less willing to support Ukraine and less willing to impose what is needed in this conflict, which are sanctions, which can stem the flow of money to Russia and cripple the Russian war machine and make peace much more likely. That's what I see happening. It's a real dialogue of the deaf. The idea that, I mean, there's no. Trump repeats things that make no sense. He said, for example, that he would end the war in 24 hours. Well, he didn't do that. He said the war would have never broken out if he had been president. But in fact, preparations for the war began when he was president. He said that the war is ridiculous and it doesn't make any sense, which indicates he doesn't know the history of the conflict. He doesn't know about the Ukrainian famine. He doesn't know about the mass killings that have taken place. And he doesn't know about how Putin himself came to power through an act of terror against his own people.
Can I pause you for a second? Because that was a very interesting question from one of the reporters in the room. And I don't recognize her, but she's, and that just to say, I would love to give her credit because it was a great question. She said, something about what are the root causes of this war, and President Trump really didn't answer her. He was saying, "Well, we're going to move towards peace." But Brenna on our live chat also liked her question and said, "I think Mr. Satter might have insight on that. What are the root causes of this war? What are we not seeing? We're kind of having a conversation. I don't want to say on a superficial level. How deep do these roots run, and what are the root causes to the war so that we can no longer have it?"
Yeah, you couldn't have asked a better question. So my congratulations to, what is her name?
Well, Brenna is the one that's on our live chat. Yes.
Yeah. Well, my congratulations to Brenna. The root cause of the war is to tighten the hold on power of a criminal group in Russia, that group came to power with an act of terror against their own people. They blew up civilian apartment buildings in 1999. And then they used that as an excuse to launch a war against the breakaway region of Chechnya. When it became clear in Ukraine that the Ukrainian society was moving toward a democratic alternative and moving toward the West, toward the European Union, toward maybe even a membership in NATO, that was threatening to the kleptocratic group that was in power in Russia. What is going on now exists and continues because of basically the interests of a small group of criminals. I mean, it's all of the talk about reestablishing the Russian Empire, defending Russian frontiers. This is all this is all propaganda. In Russia, there's an expression for it. They call it information for fools. And the fact that they pump it out through every available disinformation channel, and that our American leaders and officials repeat it, doesn't change the essence of the situation. When Putin saw that his hold on power was weakening, a key moment in this was the revolt in Belarus, which was the neighboring country to the west, where the population rose up in protest over the falsified presidential elections. That was in 2020. But they began preparations after that for the full-scale invasion. By the way, Trump was in office at that time. And once the U.S. demonstrated that we would not stand by our allies by pulling out of Afghanistan, I think that the sentiment was that there was no risk in attacking Ukraine, and which is exactly what they did in order to rally, and it had the desired effect. Putin's popularity shot up. Putin could pretend that Russia was defending against an external menace, that NATO was moving toward Russia's borders, that Ukraine was dominated by Nazis. All of it is untrue, but when you control the media and you have a population which is impoverished and uninformed, you can do a lot. You can manipulate them without difficulty, and that's been the tradition in Russia. The 10% of the population that is informed in Russia, that does understand what's going on, they fled when the war began, and they are now in Western Europe. But the remaining people demonstrated a kind of patriotic euphoria, because Russia's going to war to defend against a threat. The fact that the threat was mythical, was not clear to them, or else they didn't care. But the result was to consolidate the population around a criminal leader, and that criminal is Putin, and the people around him are criminal. I mean, what they have established in Russia is their own version of Murder Incorporated. And that's why they don't care how many people get killed. And why, Russia suffered 1 million casualties. Maybe a third of those are people who were killed, the rest injured in this war. Russia has in its law code a law which forbids aggressive war. But that's no problem for them. They just say, well, this is not a war. This is a special military operation. In 1997, they signed a peace treaty with the Republic of Chechnya, a breakaway region, in which they promised to settle all future disputes by peaceful means. 2 years later, they blew up buildings in Russian cities, killed their own people, blamed it on the Chechens, and launched a war. So you have to understand who you're dealing with here. President Trump has no idea. It's clear when he lays out a red carpet for someone who is unworthy even to set foot on American soil, let alone be greeted the way he was greeted. And in his naivete, and the naivete of Steve Witkoff, who is his golfing partner, the Russians, who are very, very professional when it comes to psychological manipulation, are convincing him that they can be serious partners for peace, and are using that in order to neutralize a threat that they take very seriously, which is the secondary sanctions. And that's what we have here. I mean, there isn't. I don't see any possibility of a peace treaty coming out of this. And Trump has abandoned the call for a ceasefire. So I think that all of what has taken place in Alaska was an exercise which really should have been avoided.
Well, let me just to bring in a voice from the administration. They're now going behind closed doors, by the way, that the press gaggle is over. Secretary Rubio was challenged on this, Secretary of State, during the Sunday shows. He was the face and the voice for the administration this weekend, explaining the point of view. And I want to play a little bit of sound from him and how he's talking about how the White House is approaching this in the reality that we're now in, which is this war has gone on 3 years. And let me just, for our audience, so that we all understand too, and we've talked about this, David, since the 2022 invasion, Congress has passed 5 spending bills to provide support to Ukraine. That's $184+ billion. About $90 billion has actually been dispersed, by the way, and that's aid of a lot of different types. So the American taxpayers involved in this war, even if we don't have troops on the ground, it's something that has absorbed a lot of time and energy and leadership capital. So here's Secretary Rubio and how he's defending the administration's approach.
Our goal here is not to stay.
Oh, hold on one second. I need to pull down something here. And pull him back up.
Our goal here is not to stage some production for the world to say, oh, how dramatic, he walked out. Our goal here is to have a peace agreement to end this war, okay? And obviously we felt, and I agreed, that there was enough progress, not a lot of progress, but enough progress made in those talks to allow us to move to the next phase. If not, we wouldn't be having Zelensky flying all the way over here. We wouldn't be having all the Europeans coming all the way over here. Now understand and take with a grain of salt, I'm not saying we're on the verge of a peace deal, but I am saying that we saw movement, enough movement to justify a follow-up meeting with Zelensky and the Europeans, enough movement for us to dedicate even more time to this. You talk about the sanctions. Look, at the end of the day, if peace is not going to be possible here, and this is just going to continue on as a war, people will continue to die by the thousands. The president has that option to then come in and impose new sanctions. But if he did this now, the moment the president puts those additional sanctions, that's the end of the talks. You've basically locked in at least another year to year and a half of war and death and destruction. We may unfortunately wind up there, but we don't want to wind up there. We want to wind up with a peace deal that ends this war so Ukraine can go on with the rest of their lives and rebuild their country and be assured that this is never going to happen again. That's the goal here. We're going to do everything possible to make that happen if it's doable. It will require both sides to make concessions. It will require both sides to get things they're asking for. That's how these deals are made, whether we like it or not.
Whether we like it or not, David, he's saying this is a situation. The secondary sanctions can go into effect. They're still there. But this is our last sort of window. How do you see how he's handicapping this situation?
Well, the Russians are stringing them along. They're giving them, they're making, first of all, Witkoff in particular goes into these meetings without a translator or without an American translator. The Russians can translate what Putin is saying in such a way as to give him an impression that he's saying something completely different than what he really is saying. And what they want to do is say, yes, oh, look, there's movement on the Russian side. We can put off the sanctions. And the Russians can string that out for a long time. And they can string it out for the year and a half that we could have used to bring this, to bring pressure to bear on the aggressor and bring this fighting to an end. He's doing the exact opposite of what he should be doing. Instead of taking Putin at face value, someone who has threatened nuclear war repeatedly, by the way, and who has launched an aggressive war, who has falsified the reasons for that war, who has shown complete lack of concern for the mass slaughter that's taking place there of Russian soldiers, of Russians. Russians are dying at a much greater rate than Ukrainians, but Ukraine, of course, is a smaller country. They're being thrown into meat assaults. It's like throwing people into a wood chipper. And
And by the way,
we-
Rubio said that. Secretary Rubio said that it reminded me of our conversation a couple years ago, David. And Secretary Rubio said Russia doesn't care. They're going to keep
they
throwing
don't care.
people in
They
front of
don't
this
care
war.
at all. And I
And
mean, they blew up their own people. Putin blew up his own people to come to power. Look, the thing is that what the Russians are adept at doing in manipulating people who are not experienced, who don't know Russian history, who don't know the Russian language, who don't know the Russian psychology, who are concerned about their fight with Joe Biden, about Obama, things that just don't matter. They can manipulate that and create the impression, I'm making progress that Joe Biden could not make. Look what Putin has agreed to. First of all, he hasn't agreed to it. He's only given some vague indications, which he can withdraw tomorrow. What he has succeeded in doing is prevented President Trump from doing what he absolutely needs to do, which is to begin to cut off the flow of money to the Russian.
okay, well, let me ask you more about that, because if Russia is as resolute and this group of criminals that's running the country as you're describing it has such a hold on power, a lack of appreciation or value to human life, then why would secondary sanctions even work? Why would that force a change when so many different rounds of sanctions hasn't thus far? And you're describing a group of people that really can be not deterred by anything.
They can be, first of all, what Russia succeeded in doing was rerouting trade flows so that instead of selling energy to Western Europe, they began selling it at a discounted rate, but in massive quantities to China, India, and other Indonesia, Turkey, other countries in the third world. But the flow of oil dollars or oil revenue was not disrupted. Russia has literally exhausted its resources building a war machine. They need that flow of oil revenues. If it's cut off, their position on the battlefield will be definitely undermined, and undermined very severely. At the same time, if Ukraine gets the help that it needs from the West, Ukraine's military abilities are increasing significantly. They have data as a result of their experience with drone warfare that could be very valuable to the United States. And there are forces in the security services, in the military, who are horrified about what Putin is doing. We just don't know who they are, and we don't know how many there are. But they exist. I'll give you an example, Jenna. When I was investigating the apartment bombings when I was in Moscow, it was people from the security services who first explained to me that it was a provocation staged by Putin and his cronies in order to take power by carrying out a terrorist attack against their own people. When the war began, there were even Russian generals who were warned that this was going to be a total disaster. Once the war was underway, they were silenced. And the disaster has now become so obvious that almost anybody can see that this was an adventure, that it had no purpose, that it was destroying a generation of Russian young men. It was leaving Russian women without the possibility of ever having families, and it was creating long-range havoc for the Russian economy. Our goal is to make sure that those forces gain strength. We don't know who they are, but they're there. And what we have is a war of attrition. People make a great deal of the fact that the Russians have gained 10 square kilometers of territory at a cost of 100,000 lives. But if you're talking about attrition, the territory isn't important. The lives are important. Yes, it's true. They have no regard for human life. That's for sure. This is a special character, a type of human being, a creature that's been created actually as a result of the spiritual damage that was done by communism. And these creatures, they're obsessed only with power. What happens, to the people who are subject to their power? They don't care, but they care about their own power. And it will reach a point in which the damage is so great that whatever healthy instincts are left in Russia will coalesce, or may coalesce. Or it may be that the machine simply can't operate anymore, even with North Korean help. But by allowing himself to be manipulated this way, Trump is not working in the interests of peace. He's actually making it much harder for Ukraine, which is valiantly defending itself, to prevail in this conflict, and for the West to reinforce the deterrence that we need, not just in Europe. We need it in Asia. We need it for Taiwan. We need it vis-a-vis Iran. Western leaders cannot afford to give the bad actors in the world, the evil forces that exist in the world, the impression that that they're fools, and they can't allow themselves to be taken for fools or to be manipulated. But for that, they need knowledge.
Natalia is asking a good question about what Ukrainians want. And if Ukrainians as a public want the war to end, then what are the next steps? David, do you see any European leaders that you feel have a clearer picture than perhaps our own leaders of the Russian oligarchy and how to handle it? And if there's public pressure from inside Ukraine to end the war, then what do you see as potentially the best case scenario? The worst case scenario, as you map it out, is continued war, and Russia just strings everybody along and continues to play us, and the bad guys gain power, and this is never ending. But could you map out a best case scenario that you're watching for as we wonder what's going to come of this meeting at the White House today?
Well, we don't know what's going to come today, and we're all very anxious to see what's going to come. The Ukrainian people are exhausted by the war. There's no question. And we talk about war exhaustion in the United States, and we haven't even lost a single person. But Ukraine is, when I was there, there were constant funerals, but they understand the cost of falling under Russian domination. They saw that in Bucha, where a suburb of Kyiv, where the Russians carried out a mass slaughter. They see it. They see it with the barbaric treatment of Ukrainian prisoners of war, who were beheaded, tortured, summarily executed, kidnapping of Ukrainian children, and they know Ukrainian history. They know about the Ukrainian famine. Ukraine has suffered more than any other country for being under Russian control. In the 1930s, the Soviet government in Moscow organized a mass famine. 4 million people starved to death in Ukraine. So they understand, just what we're talking about, this lack of respect for human life. They want to separate from that. They want to realign with the West, where human life has some value. That's the issue. And yes, they're exhausted, but they don't want to fall under this kind of barbaric domination. They don't want to share the fate of those poor Russian soldiers who are being sent into that meat grinder. So I think that what Zelensky has said, that they won't recognize the occupied territories, but under certain circumstances, they'll seek to regain them through diplomatic means, which of course means Western sanctions, is probably what that's probably the center of gravity in Ukrainian opinion now. I'm going there before too long, because one of my books has been translated into Ukrainian. Ironically, it's a book about Russia's attitude to the communist past, and I'll be talking about these issues. But they understand that as high as the cost is of this war, there's a cost that may be even higher if Ukraine is destroyed as a nation and they fall under Russian domination, which is the Russian objective, because only that can guarantee the criminal hold on power exercised by Putin and his entourage. And don't think that there's any kind of great idealistic motivation. There isn't. Just power, money, and the readiness to destroy anything that gets in the way. This is what President Trump needs to understand. What I think he doesn't understand. I think the people around him don't understand. Maybe Marco Rubio knows up to a point. I don't know, but he's repeating things that are expected of him. But
and the other European leaders, David,
the president of Finland, the president, the presidents of the Baltic republics, they're the people who've had direct experience of Russian domination. They know what's at stake, and that's why they after the debacle in the Oval Office the last time, they've arrived in force to support Zelensky. They're not there to support Putin. But it's, we have this whole war is a test for the United States. It's a test of whether a country that's as divided as we are is capable of taking a stand on principle and to defend principle. We've got the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence coming up. If we sacrifice the independence of of Ukraine to a colonizing power like Russia, I'm not sure what we're going to be celebrating, especially if we ignore the fundamental values that are embodied in the Declaration of Independence. And it's those values that Russia completely negates. So it's not just, people say it's not our fight. Why should we be involved? What does it matter to us? It does matter. It matters to our deterrence posture. It matters to the way America is perceived all over the world. It matters to our internal political situation. The idea that the American government and the American system have moral roots and that they stand for something and are not just, people will sacrifice for a country like that. They won't sacrifice for a deal. What's the point?
That definitely brings it home, gives us a lot to think about. As you're talking, I'm thinking about it, so many different things going through my head as I'm thinking about the years covering President Trump and the administration and for his first term and all that's transpired since then. Different geographical lines drawn in Ukraine, different events that have taken place that we haven't even been able to get to here. And on the one hand, President Trump seems to surprise the critics at certain moments when leadership is required. And at the same time, we also know that one thing that he does not want to be is embarrassed. And I'm watching this meeting that's taking place with feeling a great anticipation of the stakes, where you have all of these world leaders and President Trump has pulled together his social and political capital to try to do this, with a question about whether or not you're raising, if Russia's even in this at all. And if
it isn't. It's
which
just,
is right.
yeah.
So if it goes badly, I don't know if we fully have played out that scenario. And that gets us down a really scary path. But that path was always there. It's been there for the last several years. It's just, it kind of bubbles up at different times and then goes away and we move on to something else. So I I'm very curious what's happening behind closed doors here, David. And
No,
I,
we all
if
are.
only we
We
could
all
be
are.
like, just slip a little microphone underneath there and just hear how this is going. How do you say information for fools? You said that phrase. What is it? What is it in Russian? How does it sound in Russia?
Now, well, if you want, we'll practice our Russian. Informaция для дураков. How's that?
That's too hard.
I'll spell it out for our listeners.
I'm gonna need that. I'm gonna need that. Yeah, information for fools. But it makes me really think about, because it's hard as a journalist. We have to quote people what they say in the free press in the United States, right? We're going to quote you on the records. If President Trump says something, I'm going to quote him. If President Putin, says something, I'm going to quote him. And I can't say, well, we don't know. We want to quote people.
They take advantage of that.
We want to. Right.
Yeah, the Russians take advantage of that. They will say, first of all, they don't stand behind what they're saying. And they don't value words. I mean, all these threats of nuclear war, which come fast and furious, especially from Dmitry Medvedev, the former president who's been assigned that role. Interestingly, during the Obama administration, the whole foreign policy toward Russia was based on a so-called tilt toward Medvedev, as if Medvedev Medvedev was not just a talking puppet, but represented a liberal tendency in the regime, even though he was totally beholden to Putin. We get these things wrong because we're not accustomed to a country which is organized to fool the outside world.
Well, and this is why talking to you matters, because as I was saying, I need to quote people on the record. I can only present the facts as they are in order to have integrity. But if you're operating in a room of mirrors, that's a hard thing to describe at the same time. And so that's why I always think it's important. And I appreciate your generosity always of coming back and talking to us, because it's when you remind us that it's not what we think, because we don't have the same kind of cultural viewpoint. And even if we had a similar cultural viewpoint if I had a similar cultural viewpoint to a mom in Russia, I still don't really understand what it's like to live under Putin. He still is this.
See, the thing is that when a person's soul has been destroyed, appearances are misleading. What you're seeing is not what's really going on, and that's Russia's is a country. There was a famous phrase it was in 1839, I think, by the Marquis de Custine, a French writer who traveled through the Russia of the Tsars. He said, it's possible to go from one end of this country to the other and see nothing but false facades. And every Westerner should understand that. And when you go to a meeting with Putin, you should go prepared, if indeed you have a meeting at all, because what will make an impression on him is not, a red carpet and your lavish reception, all of which will convince him you're an idiot. What will make an impression on him is when he really feels the pain of tough sanctions and support for Ukraine and a determination that he not prevail. Then you'll get the peace you're looking for.
I have a final question for you, David, because Sherry's been asking on our live chat about how do we get you into the White House to speak to anybody. Have you ever been approached by a member of this administration?
So many people have asked that question. Yeah, vaguely. That question has come up, but I'm visible enough in the media, and in fact, I just recently was on a program that I know President Trump watches, and we went into the issue of the apartment bombings and other things. It's something that needs to be done, but it's up to them to do it. It's up to them to understand, and there are people working on that, by the way. But we'll see.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Well, if it ever happens, just invite us along. We'll just be quiet. We'll just
Oh,
be
I
recording,
would,
taking it.
you would be the first person I would invite.
Just, just
But
think,
but in the meantime, my view is a little different. That what is critical is American public opinion. American public opinion can make the difference. There is now a big 7-part podcast which is being prepared with my help on how Putin came to power in those apartment bombings. That'll be in January. I'll tell you more about it when the time comes.
Can't wait.
But American public opinion is capable of swaying the administration, but it needs to be informed. So it's really a battle, not even for Trump, but for the American people. And the American people have good moral instincts. If it's not true, despite all of the nasty stuff on both sides, the fact is the average person wants to know the truth, and he even is hungry for it amid all the disinformation, and they recognize it when they see it. And it's just a question of explaining it to them.
Well, I believe that too, in the American public. Far less ideological than the press would portray, and very much curious.
Far more tolerant and reasonable.
Yes.
And as long as and with far more goodwill.
Yes, I agree. It gives me hope. It gives me a lot of hope.
It gives me hope too. I believe if people are confronted with the real situation, if you get them in a situation where things can be explained to them, they will respond just as you would hope them to.
Yeah. Well, we'll let the story continue to develop as it is, David. Thank you so much for your time today. As always, we look forward to hearing about that podcast and sharing it with our audience, and appreciate always your ability to provide insight that others don't, and kind of bring us behind the scenes when we talk about that room of mirrors and kind of clarify. It's a little overwhelming to think about all these different things, these different factors at play, but continuing to have hope that we continue to have a lot to celebrate as a country going into our 250th year. So thank you again, as always.
Thank you, Jenna.
It's great to have David as part of our conversation, as always. I know it's a lot to think about, but you're able to get a background to what Russia's all about in a way that no one else can provide. And even though it can be more difficult material to work through than some, analyst that's just going to come on and tell us, well, this is one side, this is another side, and can feel a little dark and heavy. It's important that we understand this, because we're lurching in the news cycles from administration to administration. President Putin has been in power for decades, and even if he didn't, always have the same title, and that's been lasting. So the more that we can get an in-depth knowledge of that, the better I think we'll all be as we see these different headlines. So what the day will bring, we don't know, but it will certainly determine the news week. So we'll stay close on that. Thank you for your support of quick, concise, nonpartisan, smarter news. And we'll always have more on our website, on our podcasts, and throughout social media. Have a great day, guys. Keep the questions coming, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye. Thank you for believing in quick, concise, nonpartisan, smarter news. Every time you join us or share or save our content, you help us build a solution in news, and we are so grateful. We have a few other ways you can support our mission, from joining our insider community Scoop, to shopping our gear at our SmartHER shop, to just telling a friend. The best way to do any of this is to visit smarternews.com or follow us at SmartHER News on social media. Don't worry, we put all of this in the captions so it's easy for you. Plus, we added our email just in case you want to drop us a note. We always love hearing from you. Thank you for helping us deliver news smarter.